listening to the Veritas Show.
Steward Swerdlow is a gifted hyperspace intuitive who moves his consciousness beyond time and space to determine your foundational mind pattern upon which all of your life experiences are based. His great-uncle, Steward Swerdlow, was the first president of the Soviet Union, and his grandfather helped form the Communist Party in the United States in the 1930s. To ensure that his loyalties stayed with the U.S. government, he was recruited for specific government mind control experiments, including 13 years at the Montauk Project, which enhanced his natural abilities. Steward, a linguist who speaks 10 languages, is an expert in deprogramming and determining which Illuminati programs are embedded in the mind patterns of any individual. His mission is to help others heal themselves in a positive way, thus avoiding the negativity he experienced. Steward has authored and co-authored with his wife Janet several books and lectures worldwide for a variety of groups, organizations, and large corporations. You can find out more about Steward and his work by visiting his website, expansions.com. And directly from St. Joseph, Michigan, I would like to introduce for the first time on Veritas, Steward Swerdlow. Hello, Mr. Swerdlow, and welcome to Veritas. How are you?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. May I call you Steward?
Absolutely. May I call you Mel?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Well, I have to tell you, I am somewhat embarrassed, and I tell this to a lot of my new guests sometimes, because where in the world have I been that I was not aware of your work? I've spent the last couple of days reviewing your interviews, your website, and so on, and I'm so excited to have you here because you're the type of guest that we like, because you discuss so many things ranging from the paranormal all the way to what is happening in today's world, but you have a different perspective and you give a real meaning. So tonight I would like to discuss two things: your background, the Montauk Project, how you came to be who you are today, and then we can transition into what is happening today in the world and things that we can do to circumvent this sea of uncertainty that seems to be permeating right now. So to start, Steward, you were involved in the Montauk Project as a child. I know many of our listeners around the world know of you and have read some of your books, but since this is your first time on Veritas, for those who may not know who you are and what the Montauk Project was or is, give us some background of yourself.
Okay, well, I will tell you, I'll go back a little bit in time, because as you mentioned, my great-uncle, Yakov Sverdlov, was the first president of the Soviet Union in 1983. And the Montauk Project was really an outgrowth of the Cold War, because as your listeners may know, right after World War II, Nazi Germany was finished, but then the U.S. Needed a new threat, and so they devised the Soviet Union as a threat, even though at the time they couldn't even feed themselves in the Soviet Union, so they weren't particularly in a position to attack anybody. And I think that when people realized that, the government of the United States needed a new threat, and that's why in 1947 they came up with the Roswell incident, which your listeners may know, have heard me talk about. It was a staged event. It wasn't a natural event that happened because of a UFO was affected by radar equipment or thunderstorms or whatever they had come up with as a cover story. But actually, it was a staged event so that humanity would know that there was an alien presence on the Earth. And of course, this developed into other things during the 50s and 60s, and eventually there was a need for more types of control, because the Illuminati, or the powers that be, relatively are a small group. Out of the 7 billion people on this planet, the Illuminati are perhaps a couple of 100,000 in total, all the 13 families. And so when you are such a small group that needs to control massive amounts of people, weapons and armies are not enough. Obviously, you could be overwhelmed by the billions. So the most logical thing they did was to create mind control and programming for the general population of the Earth. Now, during World War II, the Germans were very much adept at doing this, and they had practices in the concentration camps and in their own population. Of course, they didn't have any monitors to stop them or regulate them. And so at the end of World War II, they had amassed so much information on programming and mind control that the U.S. government, under Project Paperclip, brought many of those Nazi scientists to the United States, Canada, and Britain in order to continue their experiments and studies without having to go through the Nuremberg trials, etc. And so one of the people that studied this information from the Germans was a Scottish scientist by the name of Dr. Ewan Cameron. And he came to Canada and basically created mind control experiments in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, where he created psychic driving, where he would create extremes for mental patients to break their core personalities into fragments, and then each of those fragments can be programmed into sub-personalities or even alters and constructs within the mind. And I'm making a very long story short. And he was so successful in Canada that in the late 1940s and early 50s, he was brought to the U.S., to the East Coast, and even to the Midwest, where he continued those experiments for the U.S. military and created mind control slaves, which in those days they started to call the females monarchs. And the reason they called them monarchs was named after the monarch butterfly, because they would be like social butterflies going to different sections of society, spying on people, transmitting information, this kind of a thing. And it extrapolated over the decades to quite a vast program of mind control and programming that's pervasive. So that is all a background for Montauk Project. The government needed a space where they could practice this unnoticed, and in those days, in the late 1950s and 1960s, basically they were using SAGE radar in bases, especially along the coasts of the United States, which would pick up allegedly Soviet aircraft that could affect the United States. And as we got towards the mid-60s, these SAGE radar stations became obsolete as new radar equipment was installed. And one of these bases was the Montauk base at the very east end of Long Island, New York. And what made it very unique is that it is really sticking out on a peninsula out into the ocean. There's really only one way to get in and one way to get out, so it's very easily monitored. It happens to be built on a very old military establishment that actually George Washington built in 1799. He built a lighthouse and an underground bunker area for storage in case the U.S. was invaded by the British. And over the centuries, it was added and added and added upon underneath the ground until they eventually broke in to caverns that had previously been existing there for thousands of years. And again, I'll make a long story short, they realized that this building, these technologies that they were finding were Atlantean, and that the Montauk Point was actually the top of a mountain of an archipelago that extended into the Atlantic and Caribbean where Atlantis used to exist. And in fact, geologically, there's only a very thin strip of sand that connects Montauk area to the rest of Long Island. And sometimes in hurricanes and storms it washes away. So in effect, Montauk Point is really an island, top of a mountain that sticks out in the ocean. And the U.S. built, right before World War II, submarine pens underneath this area. And in fact, during World War II, the local people would see German U-boats approaching the coast and submerging, and then leaving days or weeks later, and no one stopped them. And so it was understood at some point that perhaps the U.S. government and the German government in World War II were working together in some categories. In fact, in the town of Amagansett, which is very close to Montauk Point, it was one of the only locations in North America during World War II where the Germans made a beach landing with their military, which most people aren't aware of.
Right.
Yes, and in fact it was discovered afterwards when people on the beach found German rubber rafts and army uniforms that had been left on the beach. Apparently they had changed into civilian clothing and took the train into Manhattan. And eventually they were captured and executed. But it just shows that the Germans felt free enough to come to this area to land because they knew that no one would stop the U-boats in this area. So it's quite an interesting story when you read about it. Now, fast forward again to 1970, when the Montauk Project began underway. It consisted of those German scientists that were brought to the U.S. It also had Russian scientists, Israeli, American, British. There were a lot of major nations that were represented in the Montauk Project. Initially, it was about mind control and programming, yes, but over the years, over those 13 years that it existed, it also was involving genetic manipulation, time travel, esoteric weaponry, interdimensional communication, everything that you can imagine that would involve Tesla equipment and Wilhelm Reich procedures. So it was quite a comprehensive project, and I was there, unfortunately, for the full 13 years that this project existed. I was 13 years old when I went there, and the people should realize I wasn't there 24/7. You know, I would go and come back, and very often they would come for me in the middle of the night.
How were you recruited, Steward?
Well, you know, it was almost as if I always had been part of this, because ever since childhood, you know, because of my father and his background and my family background, I was subjected to many brutal, excruciating tests as a child, as a toddler. So I was always under government supervision, government experimentation my entire life until the end of the Montauk Project. In fact, in my autobiography, Montauk Project Alien Connection, I speak about how during my childhood years, my early childhood, every Friday I would be brought to a Victorian mansion in a section of New York City, and I would be brutally examined by the doctor there, who I know now to be he was called Dr. Green, but he was Mengele.
Mengele, oh my God.
Yes, and his son was also there towards the end, and I'll never forget, I was the only patient in this huge Victorian mansion, and he would have blocks on the floor, and they would tell me to go play with the blocks, and then they would watch me behind the closed doors. They would peek out and watch what I was doing. And then would come the physical examination, which was very, very harsh and painful. I can't even begin to express it. And I would go every Friday there. And then I would be taken to a dentist's office where my teeth would be drilled and things done to my jaw without anesthesia.
Oh.
Yes, I had extreme trauma as a child. So it was ongoing, Mel. It was not like I was recruited. It was as soon as my birth. And if you read about my birth, which was also an anomaly and is in the medical books, you know, quite frankly, it started before my birth.
So it's implied that you were recruited because your father was involved with them.
Yes, and that my creation and implantation in my mother's womb was also for that. Now remember, my father was taken to a base underneath El Paso, Texas.
Right.
When my mother went to give birth to me, and they examined her. They said, it's impossible for you to be pregnant because you have no birth canal. It's sealed up. You could not physically become pregnant. They didn't know what was going on. They took her to a hospital that was not opened yet. It was under construction. There was no heat. And they brought in a doctor from Texas, same place my father was trained, and this doctor happened to be a specialist in this field, just happened to be in the area, and performed surgery on my mother so that I could be born. And this is written up in medical books.
Huh.
So I was told many years later that I was one of the first experimentations of implantation in the womb of, what do they call it, in vitro fertilization.
Right.
Yeah. So that was in the 50s.
Now, you, obviously, from what I've read, you have developed some abilities. Were these abilities developed during the project, or were they innate? Were you born with them?
Yes, I was born with them ever since I could remember. I saw people who went out, I now know they were dead people. I saw energy fields. I was abducted. I had alien experiences since I can remember. So yes, I do not know what it's like to have a conventional life or to have a normal childhood. I didn't really have a childhood, see. So, to me, society was a big mystery because I was never part of it.
Well, in a way, that's a positive because you were not part of that. You may have been part of one programming, but not the other programming that we are all victims of. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when Montauk Project ended abruptly in August 12, 1983, it was if I was unplugged from an electrical socket. It was a feeling like I had never known before. I was completely bewildered, completely out of my element. I didn't know what to do, what to say, how to interact with people. I felt actually like an alien on another planet. If I tell you that I did not even know how to put gasoline in a vehicle, I did not know how to do simple things that other people take for granted. It's quite an amazing thing.
Is it that you forgot when you were quote-unquote unplugged, or you just didn't have those daily routines that most of us have?
I never had those routines. I was never shown anything, taught anything that I can say, normal quote-unquote people would learn about, Even, sports activities, it was foreign to me. I had no idea, how do you play baseball? What is football? I had no idea what these things were. What is popular music? I didn't know. Who's singing what groups for what? I had no idea.
A lot of people don't know this, but you were blind for a long time.
Oh, yes. Yeah, actually for 29 years.
Tell me more about this.
Well, and here again, I cannot say if they did it purposely or if it was a side effect purposely. They were trying to create a person who could see into other realities without the use of a device. And so the person would become the device, and I was one of those people that they did this. What they did was to create blindness in my physical eyes so that parts of my brain would take over the sight of an energetic nature, so that even though my physical eyes could not see, my mind, my brain could see energy fields and symbols, colors, and hear tones beyond the range of normal human comprehension and senses. And so that's how I went through life. And in fact, the problem existed that when it would be raining or snowing, for example, I couldn't really function outside or drive, for example, because there was this constant energy flow from the storm or the rain, whatever it was, in front of me, and I could only see the swirls of energy, and I couldn't move. And the same, yeah. And
so you could drive, although you were somewhat blind?
Yeah, well, I was quite blind, and the big joke is they called it braille driving. And you know how, how in California they have those little bumps on the lanes, and they're reflective, And
Yes.
so whenever I would go over the lane, it would hit the bump. I would know that I had to get back in the lane. But I felt actually, Mel, that I could see better than a sighted person, because not only could I see the energy of the vehicles and the people, I knew where they were going to go. I knew what moves they were going to make. See? You see, I never had an accident.
Well, let me ask you, did your optic nerves, were they connected to your brain or were they not?
Well, they were not. And in fact, in December 1999, I had surgery to reconnect my optic nerves to my brain. And that's something I will never do again, because I had to be awake during the surgery, and it was very scary. And the thing is, when after the surgery, and I had these big, bandages over my head, my eyes, and all this, and when they took the bandages off, I was very scared, because I didn't know what would happen. Would I be totally blind? Would I, see? I had no idea what to expect. And when they finally took the pads off of my eyes, and I opened my eyes, it was a surprise, because not only could I see physically, but I could see the energy fields in addition. So it was like a layer over a layer, you see? Kind of like when you have an overhead projector and you put the different films on it and you build up different pictures. That's kind of what I saw. I saw the human form plus the energy field, plus I could see inside the human form. Basically I was like a living MRI machine.
So if you were able to see, like we do, is it because they disconnected your optic nerves on purpose then?
Well, that's the thing. I don't know if they did on purpose, or was it a side effect of the ELF and microwave bombardments that I was subjected to. My feeling is they kind of knew what would happen, and their the justification was, well, he can see anyway, So in that respect, I was able to work for them in a very deep way, because one of the projects I had to do was to go into hyperspace, which is beyond the physical, beyond the astral. It's the God mind energy, and look at the color, tone, and archetype that exists there, which is the language of God, they say, and then learn what they mean, how to put them together like a formula, and create and manifest physically from that level. So I was able to go in, look at a form, look at an archetype, and I know how to translate it into human language. And that is why in my book, Healer's Handbook, I have in there a dictionary, which is the most comprehensive archetype dictionary that I know of, that translates from the hyperspace language to human language. And based on that, you can create sentences in hyperspace form that will create and manifest physically for you.
Oh, my God. Once again, I keep thinking, how in the world was I not aware of your work? And you better be sure that the first thing I did was subscribe to your newsletter. And I hope, folks, if you go to his website, expansions.com, subscribe to the newsletter and take a look at all that information. If you really want an eye-opener, this is something you have to do. But I presume that you are still, as you mentioned at the beginning, there's no way that you left the project 100%, right?
Oh, like I mentioned, when it crashed, and it crashed abruptly, I was really, it was kind of like falling out of an airplane without a parachute. And quite frankly, a lot of the people who were still alive at the time from the project had difficulties. Many became alcoholics, some became drug addicts, many went to prison, some committed suicide, some went into mental institutions because they did not know how to function. See? They did not know how to function in society. And I wrote in one of my books that out of all the people over those years that were used in the experimentation, less than 1% survived. And of that 1%, very few were able to function in society, and that's why I was an anomaly to them. Because not only was I able to function, even during the years of the project, I did not lose my memories. They always would put masked memories, false memories. They would wipe out the situation so you couldn't repeat them. But it didn't work on me. No matter what they did, I remembered it. And so, one of the solutions they have for such people, they kill them because
right.
It's the problem. But I was such an anomaly, and I was a creation anyway that must have been expensive to them. So they studied me, and they still try to study me. I know that I'm always watched, and I had begun a deprogramming process that lasted, still ongoing. Deprogramming takes a very long time, especially when you're at very deep levels. But I'm proud to say that after now 20 years, 21 now, of deprogramming, I have a good chunk of it gone. And when I get triggered, I know it. I know what the triggers are. And fortunately, I'm with a very wonderful spouse who understands this, and she watches and say, hey, you're getting triggered by such and such. And I go, okay. And we watch each other. And we monitor each other, and we help each other. And that's why I do in my work, which unfortunately, my work has morphed into becoming more like a deprogrammer and helping people to see the programs within them, tell them how to get rid of them. In my book, 13 Cube and True Reality of Sexuality, those books I specifically talk about programming and deprogramming, which is something everyone out there, 100%, needs to be working on that.
You mentioned, just to take a detour for a moment, you mentioned Roswell and that it could have been a setup, just it didn't happen. My question is, I hear so many theories as to what happened there. Could it also have been, if we needed to create a new threat, as you said, first the Cold War, now we have the War on Terror, maybe in the future we have a celestial object, and then maybe an alien invasion. But at the time, could it be because we wanted to let the Russians believe that we had this esoteric or this extraordinary technology that would scare them, thinking that we had it?
No, because they had their own crash and retrievals,
Okay.
In those days, from the late 40s to the early to mid-50s, the UFOs are dropping out of the skies like rocks all over the world, and it's because it was on purpose. And the Illuminati at that point they were saying, okay, we need to create a new global threat so that people are afraid. If there's UFOs flying in our skies and we can't defend against it, we are vulnerable. People are terrified. People are terrified. They do what they're told to save themselves. It's fear creates the atmosphere for programming to take hold.
Well, it's the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution.
Yes, absolutely. Now don't misunderstand. There were alien bodies. Yes, there were aliens. There legitimately are aliens. Yes. But this particular incident was staged by the government in order to give a calling card, if you will, to the Earth and say, yes, this occurred. Now, here's what happened. After that event happened, and I'm saying like the next day, there was a problem. And too many people were finding out too many things too quickly. And so the government pulled the plug on it and created a cover story, because what they had planned was not what happened. Now, when I use the word government at the time, it's not the government and official government. It was the secret government that staged all of this. And, of course, there is a connection between the secret government and the public government. These days, the secret government is the public government. There's no more distinction. See,
so there was a takeover.
Yeah, it's already now pretty much one thing. But in those days, in the late 40s, there was a secret government that created these events and had their liaisons with the public government, who basically told the public government what to do. And that's what happened. And they made these cover stories, and they took the vehicle away to the Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, but first they stopped off in Dallas. Yes, everybody can read about it, and it's all in so many different books. But it was a big fiasco that the government had created, and then they just covered it up.
But explain, what do you mean when you say it was staged, if there were real alien bodies then?
Well, because those bodies were dead before they hit the ground. I mean, the story in the books, the cover books, are from certain investigators that there was a lightning storm that could have affected it, or that our radar system affected the controls of these UFOs. Now, come on. These ships travel interstellar. They're not going to be affected by a lightning storm or radar system of a primitive nature.
I always say, Steward, that if it's so pathetic for an extraterrestrial, more advanced civilization to traverse billions of miles to come here to crash because of our antique technology.
Exactly correct. And that's why these were all staged. And that wasn't the only one. There was another crash in New Mexico, in Socorro or Aztec, New Mexico. There was one in Mexico, the old Mexico. There was one in Svalbard in Norway. There were several in Siberia in the Soviet Union. They were just dropping out of the skies all of a sudden. Why?
Why?
Well,
yes.
because it's like when one staged event wasn't working, they try another staged event. They did this for several years. And if you look at most of the crash retrievals that have occurred, they were from late 1940s to mid-1950s. Like, that period of time was most of them. And that's because that's when they were trying to get this thing done the right way. And then when they realized it wasn't working, they covered it all up. They created other incidences that with no evidence, and to this day, they are now still covering up, but I think that's coming now to an end.
So when you're saying that we had more in Norway and more in New Mexico, are you saying that they were all staged?
Yes, every single one of them.
So all the people, the Stanton Friedmans of the world, and all those people out there, what are they doing then? Are they perpetuating a lie?
Of course they are. Everything in history is a lie. Everything that you've learned in school, even science and a lot of math, is all contrived.
Well, history is written by the winners.
Yes, that's correct. And so most of history has been obliterated or changed.
And this is a social engineering project worldwide, Steward?
It's global in nature, absolutely global. Humankind is an experiment, and I write about that in my Blue Blood book. We are an experiment. We are a mix of two species that should never live together in the same place. We are mammalian and reptilian in the same body. And that's not supposed to happen naturally. This is a creation.
How did this happen, Steward?
Well, I go back again a long time when our planet here was really a water world, and it was the second position from the sun. And there was Mars was more Earth-like, and there was a planet between Mars and Jupiter, which was called Maldek, which was also very Earth-like. And make a long story short, all humanity, all our mammalian ancestors came from a star system called Lyrae, which was attacked by the reptilians from the Draco star system. And the refugees from Lyrae fanned out across the known galaxy and colonized many different worlds, including two worlds in this solar system, Mars and Maldek. And in those, atmosphere, and oceans, just like the Earth does. And the Earth was covered in water. The reptilians spent many thousands of years searching for the refugees because they wanted to absorb all of humanity. And they found the colonies here in this solar system, and they sent in an ice comet to destroy it. And the ice comet, make a very long story short, was very big at the time, and it came into our solar system. It caused the planet Uranus to go off of its axis and spin on north to south instead of east to west, as all planets do. And Uranus is the only known planet anywhere that still spins north to south. And then the ice comet continued on, and as it got between the positions of the gravitational pull of Jupiter, Maldek, and our sun, it caused Maldek to explode into many different pieces, which we now have as the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And as it got close to Mars, the force of the planet pulled the atmosphere and most of the oceans off of Mars, creating the planet we now see today. And as it came close to our planet, the Earth, which was a water world, the spin of the ice comet and the Earth around each other very quickly and for a period of time caused the oceans to separate and actually be pulled off of the planet, creating land exposed. The spin created polar ice caps because of the water being pulled and frozen. And then the Earth and the ice comet switched positions so that the ice comet became the second planet in our solar system captured by the sun, and the Earth was pushed out into third position and became more inhabitable. And the second planet, the ice comet, became Venus, which, being closer to the sun, the heat caused the ice to evaporate and melt and created the clouds that we now see around Venus. And back in the 1980s, before the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviets sent a space probe to Venus with a special camera that could survive the intense heat as it descended below the cloud cover. And when it descended below the cloud cover, the cameras picked up 7 domed areas on the surface of Venus, which were transmitted back to the Soviet Union. And in fact, this was reported on the front page of New York Times and LA Times at the time. And so there was this whole article that was written that stated how they were 7 dome-shaped, perfectly shaped objects on the surface of Venus, and then went on and on about it. And the very last paragraph said that NASA had determined that these were natural formations. Now,
right.
Yeah, if you know about reptilian culture, which I write about in Blue Blood book, you know that there is a hierarchy of 7 different races, each one having a specific function, and they do not mix together. And so if you have a colony of reptilians on a planet, it makes sense to me that they would be in several or separated domed areas, which we have seen now from the Soviet photographs.
Have you seen those photographs?
I have seen those photographs. Many years ago, I was very much questioned by the government about Soviet satellite photographs. That's a whole other story, but they were U.S. government, very interested in what the Soviets found out. And that's, again, another whole category. I could go on for weeks about what went on in the Soviet Union. But as far as the Earth is concerned, it was now colonizable because land masses had appeared, and so the reptilians drove another object into our solar system and parked it around the Earth colonization, and we now call that the moon. And the moon, as you know, is the only object in space that does not spin. Its orbit, only one side faces the Earth at all times. That's why it has a light side and a dark side, and we never see the dark side. It's because it's a ship parked in orbit. And when they brought the moon rocks back to the Earth in the late 60s and early 70s, it was determined that the rock from the moon did not come from the solar system. It's not from here.
You see, I love it that you're opening other doors for me, because the moon is an area or an object, no pun intended, that we always like to discuss here. So, in your opinion, the moon is an artificial object that was moved here when this all happened. With what purpose? Is it monitoring, or why is it there?
Well, it was brought here for colonization, and that is when the reptilians colonized the Earth in a continent known, we call it now Lemuria. Mm-hmm. And they were reptilian, androgynous beings, and they colonized the Earth first, and that's why the reptilians feel the Earth is their planet, because they were here first, and that's the truth.
What happened to Lemuria and Atlantis?
Well, many eons later, the human refugees from Mars and other areas colonized the Earth in Atlantis. And when you have reptiles and mammals living in the same place, they do not get along. And so there were many, many wars, many, many destructions, and ultimately the Atlanteans, with their geomagnetic weapons, caused Lemuria to sink into the ocean. and created what's left is Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific, Japan, the Philippines, even the west coast of California, west of the San Andreas Fault Line was part of Lemuria. The redwood forest up north is part of what was Lemuria. So all of these remnants were here, and when the reptilians sank, many of them went into the inner earth or under the crust of the earth for safety reasons, and that began the legend later on of hell under the earth or demons living under the earth. That's where that came from. Mm-hmm. And it was only after the Atlanteans destroyed themselves many millennia later that the reptilians underground thought, okay, now we can come back up to the surface. But so much time had passed that the humans would not accept their appearance because they looked demonic. And
is it true, and I mean, just to interject, is it true that they liked it, that inner earth or underground was demonized as hell, if you want to call it that way, because that way they would not be bothered underground, and they liked it that way?
Well, I don't know if they liked it that way. I only know that part of their colonization process was to prepare the planet for assimilation into the Draco Empire. And that is what they have felt a compelled need to do. And so that is why they wanted to retake the surface, but in order to do so, they had to start a hybridization project so that they could be accepted in some way. And that's where shape-shifting came in, because when they mixed 50-50 genetics, human and reptilian and mammalian, the body could shift from one to the other. And that's the story of how shapeshifters began on the planet.
And we have Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. How did these races come to be?
From the different reptilian races that donated genetics to these particular cultures. And you know, when you go back in the Bible and you look at Genesis, and what does it say in Genesis? Let us create man in our image. Always it's plural when referring to God. If it's a singular God, why is he talking in the plural? See? And
True.
so, and the story, the allegorical story of the creation of Eve from the rib of Adam, that really is about taking an androgynous reptilian body and separating it into male and female components by adding mammalian genetics. And that's why when you observe a human fetus gestation in the womb, for the first few weeks, it's reptilian androgynous. And only after several weeks do mammalian characteristics start to form. And that's because the genetic code is following the sequence in which it developed. It was reptilian body first, and mammalian genetics were added afterwards. And then we can see this in the womb.
Why the genetic manipulation? Why the mixture between humans and reptilian?
That was so that the human beings would accept reptilian overlords, so that they would actually be part of them. It was also part of a peace process, which I write about in Blue Blood, where before Lemuria and Atlantis were destroyed, a peace process was developed where they decided to create a blending of the two races or species in order to create a third to show unity between them. But of course, it was a miserable failure.
Of course. And all this mind control, let me just fast forward a little bit. We all know the digital boxes that our nice government is giving to all of us so that we could be entertained.
Yes.
What's your take behind the digital boxes and the digital signal in our TVs?
Well, of course, it is to monitor. Even when you turn your television off, it can still watch you.
Yes.
And even when you unplug your computer, it still can watch and monitor you. And this is something that's been going on for quite a long period of time. And in order to now consolidate it and unify it across the field, they, of course, destroyed the signal so that you can only watch television if you have this digital service. They're doing this everywhere.
What are they using the analog signal for now?
Well, that signal is very, let's say, more difficult to manipulate. And so they use it for their own inner communications amongst themselves.
This is just an important thing to ask you. This is in your blog right now. And let me just, talking about mind control. I'm 10 minutes away from the Tucson massacre, just as a matter of disclosure. My wife was across the street having breakfast with our daughter when this whole thing started, and she saw the helicopters and the ambulance come in. Vigilante activation. Tell me what you think happened here, Steward.
Well, did you see the picture of this Jared Loughner when he was, the photograph of him in the prison?
And the first thing I said to myself was, he is a suspect until he's proven guilty. Why is he being shaved if he's in detention?
Yeah. Why did they shave him and make that weird expression on his face for CNN and Fox and all the other news services to show? Because he looks like an alien being, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He looks like something from a sci-fi movie. And he's supposed to look weird and scary.
Right.
And he is now a conspiracy theorist who has gone bad and is an example to the world of what happens when you believe in conspiracy theories. You see? Look at him. He looks not even human being. And if you look at his eyes, you can see one eye is bigger than the other eye. And that is a telltale sign of a deeply programmed person. In fact, if you look at many of the media entertainment icons there on television and in movies, you'll notice that one eye looks different than the other. It's not completely symmetrical. That's a sign of a programmed person, deeply programmed person who is in an activated state.
And I like to tell people that I didn't jump to any conclusions. First of all, because I'm here, and the Congresswoman happens to be my Congresswoman in the area. She was born on the 8th. She is the representative for District 8, and she was shot on the 8th.
Yes.
Is there a correlation here, Stewart?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you know the numerology or the astronumerology of all of this, it was a purposeful action so to trigger people with this vigilante programming. And what happened after that shooting? Well, in the last week or so, how many police officers across the country have been shot?
Yes, a lot.
Many. This triggered a chain reaction, activated vigilante programmed people across the country. And that's going to get worse. And in fact, it may have even triggered the explosion in Moscow airport. So unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of this in 2011. 2011 is a year, what I call an everything year. That means everything will happen and can happen. And that includes every program function out there will be opened up.
Just in the last few weeks of January, Stewart, we've seen more news than we've seen probably in years before.
That's right, and it's only January.
Right.
So, fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a very rough ride this year in many categories.
Another aspect I found interesting, the Congresswoman was taken to a facility in Houston.
Yeah.
As opposed to the many wonderful facilities. We have the Mayo Clinic. We have many great facilities in Arizona.
Yeah.
Many rehab facilities.
But look at the facility she was taken to. It's connected to the military.
Right.
So what does that tell you? What are they doing to her? She's being programmed now to be represented to the population as a survivor of a vigilante attack, of a conspiracy theorist. She has survived this, and now you're going to see her propelled politically to the highest levels.
There's obviously a problem reaction solution here. The problem was that we had supposedly a lunatic who came in with guns, which, by the way, doesn't it look like the Virginia Tech massacred. Isn't there a correlation here, perhaps even Columbine and others?
Yes, I've written about all of those. Every single one of them had to do with a programming trigger and activation. First of all, Columbine, it's interesting, because if you look at either immediately before, during, or after these events, there is some type of a weather anomaly in that region, like a vortex is created. And in the Columbine, Littleton, Colorado, there was this huge blizzard on May 1st, right after the shooting, blinding blizzard. And the first thing they said on the news was, "Oh, this is not unusual for this area this time of year." Well, yes, it is, because the people who live there say that's never happened before. The same thing happened with many of the other shootings all across the country. Huge rainstorms, floods occurred after some type of weather anomaly occurred because of the microwave and ELF pulse that was concentrated into that area. And so I also noticed in Arizona, shortly after that, an earthquake occurred just up north, a 3.5 quake in the central part of Arizona. You can look on the USGS map. I had never seen one there before, but could have been the result of this ELF pulse to trigger the vigilante programming.
Well, let me also mention that I monitor chemtrails almost on a daily basis just to make sure I know when they're spraying and when they're not. And the only times in the past few weeks that I saw them stop was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And they continued as usual every single day. And that day I was going to film a lecture. And I noticed first thing I did was look in the sky, and it was clear, nothing at all. And immediately I was faced with traffic, and my wife called me that the shootings were taking place. What's your take on chemtrails?
Well, they've been going on for quite a long period of time, and they are filled with all kinds of bacteria, viruses, mycoplasmas, filaments that are designed to do several things. They are changing the genetic structures of the people that inhale them or breathe them in. They are creating illnesses to eliminate certain genetic types that they don't want around. And they're also creating this web, electromagnetic web in the ionosphere, so that there's a grid system being created over the Earth, and makes it easier to dial in to a particular area of a grid to send transmissions of the ELF or microwave or whatever is necessary for that area, according to the Illuminati. So there's many, many purposes for what they are doing with them.
Strontium, barium, aluminum, the incidence of all the mental disease, Parkinson's, and the others. I'm just trying to understand, is there an activation process that has to take place for them to what I'm trying to say, is there an end game for chemtrails, or is this just a slow process?
Well, as I say, it's been going on, at least that I know of, since the mid-'80s. The chemtrails.
Oh, 80s.
Yes, I remember them. I used to, in those days, it was called high flyers, because you'd look up and you'd see these little lines forming over the sky. And in those days, back in the mid-'80s, it was only in English-speaking countries. We saw them in U.S., Canada, Britain, and Australia. Then, as we got into the 90s, we saw them in Germanic-speaking countries. I saw them in Switzerland and Germany. And then finally, the end of the 90s, they were everywhere. And so definitely they are manufactured artificially to change human life in conjunction with the HARP project, the satellite projects that's going on. Oh gosh, there's so many things that they're doing in order to change life as we know it. And of course, what they're doing now is trying to create or recreate prehistoric conditions on the Earth. There's an ice age coming.
And they want to bring back the mammoth.
Yes, among other things. I wrote about this mammoth. They announced it on the news, but I wrote, if you had read the listeners read the website, back in 1999, when I was working in Oslo, Norway, I read a Norwegian newspaper then and I'll never forget it, an article that said that Russian and Japanese scientists had cloned a mammoth from the cells taken from a frozen mammoth discovered in Siberia, and they had implanted an African elephant that could carry it to term, and that it would be due in a few weeks, and they were excited to see the results. And so was I. It's like, wow, I can't wait until they put in the newspaper when this mammoth is born. And there was never another word about it until last week.
Of course.
So
Jurassic Park is real, then?
Oh, yes, it's very real. And, you know, they have already recreated the Thunderbirds, which have been released in North America. They have done many, many experimentations that have been released over the decades. Mothman from West Virginia was part of that process. You know, there's so much animal anomaly that they have created. Chupacabra, all these things have been creations that were released into the public.
Stuart, we have to take our one and only intermission. We have so much more to discuss. Folks, as you can tell, we are going to try to extract as much from Stuart today, but there's no way. We need a few days continuously to be able to talk with Stuart to get all this information. But in the meantime, Stuart, tell us how to get in touch with your work.
Yes, please go to expansions.com, and on there you can sign up for the free newsletter that you'll get every day, and there'll be a lot of information in there. And peruse the website. There's news, there's comments, there's articles. Everything that you'd want to know about the world is in there.
And when we come back, there's a few elephants in the room. Number one, yesterday, a Utah Army base was closed, locked down because of a serious concern. There's Tunisia, now Egypt, with their revolts. This is unheard of, folks. I said it a couple of weeks ago. People were not discussing it. This is having a domino effect. Iran, the discussions broke down, and then 24 hours later, they sent their naval fleet to the Red Sea. 1:11, I want you to tell us what the meaning of 1:11. A lot of us look at the clock or the watch at 11:11 or 1:11 or 4:11, and it's not only me, it's everybody. And I want to discuss all these things with Steward Swerdlow. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to Veritas. We'll be right back. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to talk more with our special guest in our members section. If you're not a member, just head on over to our website, veritasshow.com, and click on the subscribe link to listen to the rest of the show. As a member, have you subscribed to the iTunes link? Let iTunes download all segments of each new show automatically. There's a link in the members section. Just click on it and let iTunes do the rest. We'll take a short intermission, listen to some music, and we'll be right back with more. Enjoy.